Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. I would like to take just a second to personally welcome Katrina and Kathy to the table. We're super excited to have you here, and I think you're going to enjoy working with this wonderful and esteemed team. We've been together a while now. All right, so we are going to move to item 17, which is the discussion of the quarterly report from Montebello Unified School District. Would you please come up to the table? Consultant Gay Roby will introduce this item. Joining her today are institutional representatives, Dr. Anthony J. Martinez, Superintendent of Schools, Francisco Arregui, Administrator on Special Assignment, Angelica Paz, Program Specialist, and Patricia Salcido Mez, Teacher on Special Assignment. Does anyone need to recuse themselves? Moving forward, Ms. Roby, will you begin?
Thank you. You get to hear from the other Ms. Roby. Lynette had the morning, I get the afternoon. This is the first quarterly report, but the second report from the Montebello Unified School District. Their site visit took place in March of 2018, and some of their preconditions were found to be not in compliance. So you requested a preconditions report right before the summer break from the schools. So you have received that report that notified all current candidates that they were on a probationary status and that they were moving forward when aligning their preconditions and how they were going to do this. Their second quarterly report, again with your scheduling, seems so off. Their second report's due at the end of this month, even though you're meeting right now, and this report came into us in August. So you will find a lot of things was before their school started as well. So they're in the planning stage and have since been implemented. So the four of them here will be able to talk about how the implementation went, at least for their first steps. Like many of the other reports that we get on a quarterly basis, we ask them to prioritize some of the ones that can be done early or are more important, things like that. So you'll see some of them have had more attention given to them. Some of them will be upcoming as the school year marches on. The site visit had 6 stipulations, and if you move down to attachment A, that is their report, and the stipulations are listed in the left-hand column with the actions that they have taken to date listed in the right-hand column. They have given a lot of attachments for you, but please note the one attachment that they gave us that was included names of candidates and mentors. We are verifying it did come into us, but are not publishing it for their privacy issues. So that did come in. It was compliant with all the things that the report needed to do as well.
Thank you. We'd now like to call the institution to say a few words, if you'd like, about the report, and then we'll move into discussion.
Got it. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to listen to us and for the tremendous support that you've given the Montebello Unified School District. Coming into this program just a couple of months ago, seeing the previous meetings, the previous notes, all the stipulations that were given by this group, and seeing the growth from that point of the first meeting to where we are now has been tremendous, and we do definitely appreciate the support that has been given to the Montebello Unified School District in allowing us to continue this program that really benefits not only our district, our teachers, but also the students who we serve. Since that time, we have hired an administrator to oversee the program, who you've talked to previously as a teacher on special assignment, Ms. Angelica Paz, who has really taken the lead for the induction program for our district. And I will turn it over to her so she can speak a little bit more about the strides we've made from the site visit to where we are now.
Thank you so much. Yes, as Mr. Adey has mentioned, I have become the program specialist, but also in a lot of collaboration and work with my colleague, the teacher on special assignment to my left, Patty Salcido Mays. This has been a learning journey as well. Since then, we have also added 2 more teachers on special assignment And from the August 31st report, when we submitted, we've actually also increased in preliminary candidates that we have. We have now 20. I think at the time we had 14. And since then, we listened to the board in terms of the mentor match. We have now consulting mentors that we coordinate support with to meet the needs of the individual candidates based on their credential and instructional setting. We have mostly special ed. So we are developing the program, working with our consulting mentors, our program site mentors, and have been collaborating outside of just the program itself with HR, our Human Resources Certificated Department, our SPED department, and our Educational Services Department as well. You want to mention something? And Patty can probably share some more information.
So, good afternoon. Coming from the special education point of view, I think we've grown a great deal in terms of supporting our candidates, not just as a mentor match, but also in terms of the resource and the collaboration with our special education department. So our educational department and SPED department have collaborated together to work towards our new candidates. That's been tremendous this year. We are also resourcing out with support from LACO and our SELPA, which is Downey Unified, which is very powerful in terms of our early childhood. There's not a lot of resources out there for early childhood special ed. So we're getting very creative with that, and we're very proud of our special ed support. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'd like to open the floor to the members of the COA to ask any clarifying questions or have any comments from Montebello. We practice our wait time very well here. Member Alvarado, thank you.
So thank you for the work that you've done to this point. I know that it's a lot of work, and ultimately, I mean, it's for the betterment of the students who are actually served by these teachers. So thank you for that. I do have a question on Common Standard 4, the table that's found on page 4 of the report, where it states, in terms of the concern identified is, within 1 year, the unit leadership creates and implements a continuous comprehensive improvement process. In terms of what's been done, it speaks to an advisory board, which is an absolutely important piece of it, but there's more to it than that, and I would hope that, or maybe you can share with us, what else are you working on that would show evidence that you're engaged in continuous program improvement on a systemic and ongoing basis?
Thank you for the question. So we have increased our advisory board members to include IHEs, our school site administrators, principals, teachers, and very recent completers as well. That has also we have surveys now. We've done a professional learning needs surveys from our candidates so that we have an idea of what we need to specifically look at for each individual candidate. We've included feedback from our advisory board, from our candidates, for the mentors that we have coordinated support from. And based on that, we're also now having mentor trainings, and as well as the use of video observations that is really going to help us as TOSA full-time release or program staff, and that the coordination between that and the consulting mentors that we have. We are also working with educational services, coordinating support from their individual program leaders so that they can come in and support our induction candidate based on, again, that specific credential and teaching assignment. I don't know if I'm answering the question.
If I may, just I'd say that in the next report, if it would be helpful to know what are the data elements that you're collecting, and how you're using those data elements then to inform a refinement or an improvement of the program you're delivering, and include all of those data elements. Again, I understand the important role that an advisory board plays, but that's one element. out of a more comprehensive approach and a systemic ongoing way of doing it. Thank you.
Yes, Member Chikowski.
Thank you. I appreciate your suggestion. And as I listened to you initially, I'm responsible for my own teacher induction program, so I can empathize with where you guys are coming from. But I wanted to say too that it's clear you've invested resources in growing your program, right? You got them from somewhere. You persuaded somebody that this was important enough to put some really highly qualified teachers on special assignment and administrators in front of, right? So I would say that your comment about the data is the way you keep those resources. You know, it's how you build your program. I mean, I'm probably just stating the obvious, but that's something I've learned, is that when you can make a really compelling case for the powerful effect that your program has on retention and growth, it gets a lot harder for anybody to take it from you. At least so I hope. Thank you for putting in that work.
And thank you. We appreciate that as well. The feedback that we're getting from the board, we actually are in the process of collecting all that information, given that we had our induction candidates enrolled August 29th and the report submitted the 31st. There was really not much that we can show, but we are definitely collecting that data for you, and we will include it in the next report.
Yes, Member Erickson.
Besides just collecting the data, can you talk about the ways in which you're planning to use that data to look at continuous improvement for your mentors and the candidates in the program?
So that's one of the things that we were looking at. We were collecting a lot of data, but what are our next steps? So we were looking at not just ways that other districts do this, but also for us to be creative for our own population. We looked at the needs of our general ed teachers as well as of our special education. So one of the ways that we're using our data is to look first at professional development that they need. Special ed is very challenging for us with early childhood or physical education. We don't have PD for that. So we're getting resourceful with our SELPA. So that's how we're getting creative. That's one way we do it. For the special ed piece, a lot of our data shows that the content we could support with our consulting mentors as well as with ourselves, but not with compliance, because we're not compliance. That's the special ed department. So that's where we start to develop that collaboration to see what those teachers need from the collaboration part and that piece to bring it in. So we're looking at really that direct impact on the teachers, and that's been beneficial for us. Did that answer your question?
It did, and that would be really helpful with the next report, I think, to include some of that data and how it has impacted the way you do things.
A couple of clarifying questions just to get a better picture of things. Looks like you had your first advisory board meeting in October. How did that go? And were there any specific outcomes from that meeting that we would be interested in?
It went very well. In terms of attendance, we had in the past not very much attendance, but we've had a variety of individuals so that they're now aware of what induction is. What we noticed is many of them had this perception of BITSA, and that's all they knew. So really introducing them to the new standards, what they look like, what it will look like, and having that input, again, from school site administrators who support their induction candidates, their new teachers, our HR department, just in general. So everybody is really supportive in aligning the support that they give to these beginning teachers. Also having perspectives from newly completers. You know, having them come in and say, this is what it looks like. And it may look different from what we've provided in terms of support from the previous years. So it's been a great learning experience and really bringing people together from different perspectives so that we can take a look at their input to really improve our program. So a lot of the things that we are now doing is just the changes that we're making is the use of video observations. It's that now program monitoring. I'm going to go in there. We do peer observations. We now have consulting mentors that we can coordinate support with and go in there. And now this individual teacher has support from everyone, whether it be the district, and we can coordinate that support from the district or the school site or their individual colleagues. So.
Another part that has been very beneficial is our collaboration with IHEs. And that's been amazing because we talk a lot, especially with Mr. Enrique, is recruitment and retention. So having this collaboration with our IHEs, and for Cal State Los Angeles, they're building their program as well. We developed a lot of ideas together. So I think we're very excited about that relationship that we're developing with our IHEs.
By chance, are you getting transition documents from with your candidates? Yeah. We'll keep your fingers crossed on that one. The other question I had for you was just a technical question. It's for stipulation number 4. It says the TOSA will begin providing a weekly 1-hour support. You're the mentor, correct? The TOSA acting as the mentor. And how do you document those 1-hour meetings? Is there a log? Did I miss that? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
We do have a log, but we also have inductionsupport.com that we were starting to use. I have an example here if you'd like to see it. But that's what it, yes. So that's that's another change that we've made. We no longer have NTC, so we're in the process of developing our documentation, our tools, and utilizing them, and really being strategic about what we're asking our teachers to do, and being really in terms of what their individual needs and the growth, and how we can see that as we continue through the program.
Terrific. Thank you. Just a reminder to the COA that this is listed as an action item. We don't have to vote on it. We can just acknowledge the report unless you'd like to make any changes to the report. You can still talk about it if you want to. Yes, Member Alvarado.
No changes, but I would suggest that whatever advice was given by the various members that be included in subsequent reports.
And we truly appreciate the advice. We really want to take that to heart and go back there. Again, and there's another thing that we really want to advocate for the program and the new standards. We've been allowed to go to our administrators and share all of where we're at in terms of our status, but also what we want to do moving forward with our candidates, our teachers, and just improve teaching and learning in general as well.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Member Riggs?
Will there be a way for us to get a record of what was recommended like we did in the other situation, so we don't have to have collective memory?
So what I heard is that in the next report, you would like more information about the exact kinds of data that they're collecting, how they're using that data, and how it has impacted their program, or what kinds of changes or improvements are they seeing as a result of that. So a lot of the same kinds of things we see for that standard. That's what I've heard. I don't know if I missed anything else, but does that make sense? We'll put that in the minutes.
Just that when they come back again, will we be able to reference that those were the recommendations? That's my question.
Yes, okay. We will definitely put that in the item. Okay.
Dr. Carney, did you? No? Okay. All right. Thank you so much. That was great clarification there. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming all this way to share your quarterly report with us, and we wish you safe travels back, Dr. Martinez, Mr. Aregi, Ms. Paz, Ms. Mays, and Ms. Roby. Have a good evening, afternoon. All right. We're going to go to item 11. Ms. Roby again, and she will be talking to us about the Cal APA and updates on changes to the Administrative Services Credential Standards for the Administrative Performance Assessment. Ms. Roby, will you begin, please?
Thank you. Hello again. It's me. Back when we had our last major revision of the Administrative Services Credentials, which we call ASC, and then we put preliminary in front of it for PASC, or clear in front of it for the Clear Induction Program, and call that CASC because it's a lot less mouthful. We alluded to the coming of a performance assessment and basically said when that comes along, go by their rules. And about a year ago, Terry Clarker realized it's time to elaborate on those rules. So she basically went to what the Cal TPA uses as implementation rules and brought it over to the Cal APA program standards. The committee, or the the commission approved of those changes in June. But because we were going into an immediate implementation of the Cal APA within weeks, if not months, we put them effective immediately. If they were going to be implementing the Cal APA, then they needed to have support structures for their candidates, have them in their publications and notifications, have processes for remediation, things like this. And that worked very well for 5/7 of our color cohorts in accreditation, because those folks didn't have any data or reports that were due to the staff for this year. However, for orange and for yellow, they had program review and site visit, respectively. And to ask them to be effective immediately and be able to have them as a part of a review was a little bit daunting. So we created a win-win kind of a data sheet that said these are the pieces that the new standards ask you to cover as a program. And we're suggesting that these are places that you might put them into your program review, which would be due October, so they had about 4 months to do it. So nothing new to create. We're just suggesting this is where they might fit. But again, we don't tell them what to do. We merely give them suggestions. They were free to put them wherever they felt fit best. But we wanted to give them a running start and be able to do that. So then a program review team would read it, give them feedback, and their response would be due 8 weeks before their site visit. So that gave them the same year as everyone else. They just had more delineated input on things that they were not seeing as part of the program review, which then left us our yellow folks who are going into site visit for this year. We had 10 programs 10 institutions who had past programs and were dealing with the Cal APA being reviewed this year. 2 of them were in October, and the last one ends May the 2nd. That's a huge range of implementation. And to ask them to do things was a large timeline. So we talked to them about the expectation that you be doing and learning and putting these things in place, and then being able to show where you were along with that path. In the agenda item, I gave the example of perhaps a handbook. If you work for a large institution such as a CSU, you get one chance to print a handbook a year, and it might be spring. And so they could have this addition to a handbook, but they would not be able to show it to you in the handbook because it wasn't going to be printed until spring of 2019. So we gave them the same opportunities to say these are the things and places we're saying that you can address these new standards, but then we also gave them a list of questions that the review team was given and posted for everyone to be able to review as well, that says, now that you're thinking about implementing these brand new things, where are you at along this continuum of implementation, or how have things changed in your program? So we have given support to the yellow cohort as well. Today you heard one of the first 2 who have a Cal APA program, Shasta County Office of Education. And you'll see in their report they referenced how they prepped each of the cycles. Cal APA has 3 cycles, and they delineated what field experience, what coursework helped them to prepare and prep for that. So as you go through this year and have more reports from institutions who are dealing with the Cal APA, you should have more and deeper and a greater understanding and presentation of them as we move towards full implementation. We have full implementation. It's a non-consequential year this year, which means that they don't have to pass the test, the examination, in order to get their credential for this year.
But they have to take it.
They have to take it.
Yeah. Make sure everybody. All right.
Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah. Going forward this year, when we have these folks come up with the results of their site visits, is there any guidance that you might provide us with regards to clarifying questions we might ask of these institutions? For example, one of the reports we heard today, they referenced alignment with the Cal APA. In my head, I was thinking versus preparation, responsibility for making sure their candidates knew how to sign up, register, time to take the test, what kind of support and guidance they were giving them from the get-go. I didn't know how far or how deep we could go with those questions. What might you suggest for the... Okay.
To each cycle,
Okay.
And we're setting standards for next spring for passage of each of the cycles. So they should have a deep understanding by now. Maybe not implementation, but they should have all the planning down and the education. We went from 23 programs during our pilot and field test to 65 programs implementing this year. So the learning curve has been tremendous when you think of how many faculty members touch the Cal APA. So we all are learning together.
Wonderful. Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Roby? No? Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Jumping around, we are going to item 19, which is the discussion of the annual accreditation data system submission process. Director Terry Clark at the table for the first time today. Welcome, Terry. And analyst Nicole Hill will present this information item. Ms. Clark, will you begin, please?
Happy to do so. Good to see you all. Had a few other things that we're working on this morning, so I wasn't able to get here. So in the item itself, item 19, you see a report that we have all the reports in. This was really close for a while. These were supposed to be in by August. Yet we were in October and we got to CCAC week, and I'm still sending final emails that if we don't have your report within a week, it is going to go notice to the COA that you are late. By October 19th, they were all in. So it was touch and go there for a bit. We really believe that in future years, when people understand the system, they'll do a lot better at this. So we were very happy about that. You see on the cover page the number of institutions that sponsor within each segment. For example, CSU, we know, has the 23 campuses, the 22 campuses that Do Educator Prep plus Cal State teach. In those 23 campuses, they created 414 reports. Now, there are not 414 commission-approved programs because within the multiple subject program, some institutions had to prepare 2, 3, 6, 7 reports depending upon how they offer their program. If they offer it as both an undergraduate and a postgraduate, that's 2. If the postgraduate has a traditional process and an intern version, you're now up to 3. It just grows. And some of you are nodding because you've been in the system. But we are getting a much better handhold on what is actually going on out there. So on page 2 of the item, we gave you a summary of the data points, and they're not where we want them to be. We will be coming back to you later in this year because we want some data that does speak to the topic of program efficacy eventually. But right now we're really at pretty much demographic data, but it's a start. It is a huge start, which is really nice. There are a couple of things we want to talk with you about. One of them is identified right at the bottom of page 2 onto page 3. As we were talking with institutions this fall, it became very clear that there are a number of institutions that have almost cohorts of people who are teaching on Stips and PIPs, short-term staffing permits or provisional internship permits. So that person is a teacher of record. If they're not in a program, then they're out there usually on their own, not moving forward. So we're glad that they're in a program. But the institutions had trouble figuring out where to identify those people because they are a student teacher officially because they're not an intern, but they're an employee, so they're kind of like an intern. And so I think there are some times where people put them in an intern category, and I think other times people put them in a student teaching category. So one of the things we're suggesting this year is maybe you should consider directing us that we should have another category, which is holders of Stips and PIPs. Then we would have a better handle maybe on what's going on there. And that goes very closely to the appendix document that we provided to you. This is something we developed during the year. Ms. Hill, who's at the table with us here, she had office hours on a weekly basis. She talked to a lot of people through Zoom, and they were very appreciative of the support and help, I know. And we crafted this kind of definition of how do you figure out which category to count your candidates in. If you do suggest that we add a Stips and Pips, we will modify this page because we did identify what people call just traditional student teaching. And then we tried to clarify co-teaching. We're going to give you some data in a minute, which is the first time this data has been seen by eyes beyond about 3 of us from the system. The teacher residency, which is becoming more and more of a topic now because we have all this money going out for residency programs. A number of our private IHEs talk to us how they actually have a whole cohort of people who are intentionally in a private school setting getting a credential because they want a credential, but they're not in a public school setting. So we actually did create this private school option. And then, of course, there's the intern option. So we were hoping you'd have a little conversation with us about this idea of the Stips and Pips, and do the definitions there in the appendix make sense to you, or are there any modifications you would suggest? And after you have that discussion, then we'll hand out the extra data. Yes.
Cheryl. Well, I wanted to add 2 things. One thing, the issue of Stips and Pips is enormous right now. So Terry and I have been throwing around the idea of possibly bringing together via a Zoom meeting IHEs who are serving Pips and Stips to get a better sense of what's really happening out there right now and what challenges you're facing, just to get a really good sense of it. So that's outside of this item, but I just wanted to mention that I'm hearing a lot, and I want to better understand how you're trying to address them, what's happening. I think we all do. The other thing, though, is as we go talk about the list of definitions on teacher residency, it's become very clear to us, I think, that we need to clarify that can only be a student teaching option, that people are intermingling what they think is an intern program with a residency program. So I think we do need to do some massaging of this to make sure it is a student teaching component, or a type of student teaching that is really only able to be offered by an IHE in partnership, of course, with the district.
Yes, Member Morrison.
Question for Terry. These hybrid student teaching, working as a teacher, fully employed, do you have any idea, is that geographically more prominent in the state, or is it certain subject areas that are reverting to this?
We don't have a good understanding of that yet because we haven't ever gotten the data. I do know it is in certain geographic areas, it is much more pronounced. There's also the reality that in districts that are in higher income areas, there's a lot less of that than in districts that are lower income. And that's something that we would hope to get a better handle on. There's another issue, and this has to do with more what Cheryl was talking about, because someone is often on a PIP or STIP because they've not satisfied subject matter. That's one of the key reasons someone is not yet in an intern program. And of course, the requirements for you as a preparer of teachers is they cannot do their student teaching for you until they satisfy subject matter. So we've got a number of conflicting forces here, because having that individual who is teaching our children have support and guidance and pedagogical knowledge is really important. But you don't want to put your program's accreditation at risk supervising them in student teaching when they don't really qualify to be in student teaching yet.
Yes, Member Erickson, and then Member Alvarado.
So this is kind of a larger issue than the CTC, I think. I think that the CDE has to be involved in this because we don't always know who the STIPs and PIPs are. Sometimes they announce it to us in class that they're on a long-term contract, but we might not know to be able to give, and of course, we don't have support for them. We have support for interns, additional support, but that's up to the district. So it seems like we need to work hand in hand with the Department of Ed.
I hate to burst anyone's bubble. The Department of Ed has no idea about any of that, because in our state, it is a local control state, and all 1,800 districts and charter schools have the legal authority and do it all themselves. The department is not going to be able to help us at all on that matter. And how you just described it is, I know what's happening at your institution. We don't know what's happening at all the other institutions, which is one of the reasons Cheryl and I are thinking having a conversation with institutions that are grappling with how do we work with people who are on Stips and PIPs could be very productive to have a better understanding. Because hearing you talk about it, at your institution, you consider them traditional student-teacher candidates until something gets dropped that, oh, I'm actually employed on a long-term contract. Interesting. Oh, this is...
Yes, Member Forbes.
Well, since we're certainly attending to the subject matter requirements before they start student teaching, where I've noticed this cropping up is in our undergraduate population before they're in the program. So I was wondering about in some of these integrated programs now, why, because they start out, usually it's been in a high need area like physics. And the district will call us begging to convert this person to a student teacher. So first we have to say, well, they haven't graduated yet, or, all of the different legal requirements, because they're just desperate, right? And so, I know we had a situation like that with somebody who was completing the foundations while before actually starting the student teaching program. So I wouldn't ever identify that person, although I know that happened because they're not in the 5th year credential program. Right.
Member Alvarado.
So it really is a challenge because there are a good number of classrooms that have individuals who are supposed to be teaching students, but they're not actively engaged in any kind of program. At least for us, and I know that many of my colleagues in CSU, we actually don't admit students into the program until they establish subject matter competency. The challenge is when you put the demand of having to run a class, in addition to then being responsible for completing coursework in a teaching credential program, and then on top of that, you layer the passing the CSET exam, then you create an untenable situation for those candidates. And yes, it helps them in the short run, but in the long run, we could be losing someone who could be a great teacher if they dedicate their efforts to passing that CSET first.
I was just going to give also a little historical perspective. Well, probably 20 years ago now, because 2042 has been around that long, but a practice that used to be in place was that there were institutions, not all institutions, who used to actually encourage students to start, and we would have candidates who would get entirely through a program and not be able to meet subject matter. So it was moved for the benefit of the students they're teaching, but also for the benefit of the candidate in not being deeply in a program that they will not be able to, that won't be able to result in a credential. And so, that's another, just another piece of history.
Member Forbes.
Well, I just wanted to clarify that because you have to have a degree in order to get a short-term staffing permit, when I mentioned undergraduates, I meant not the undergraduates, but the coursework that some of them are taking, because many of these are career changers who already have a degree in something else, and so they're taking undergraduate coursework as part of prerequisites for the credential. And I don't know that would happen in a 4-year program. I would doubt it, but... I think within that population of students that we don't normally think of is, well, they're not admitted to our programs because they haven't met subject matter. So I'm not sure how I would identify those, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yes, Member Alvarado.
So it seems to me that the challenge is how do you provide support to those individuals that are not yet eligible to be in a credential program or most credential programs. And it could be that in the same way as intern credentials have requirements where the districts have to provide intern support providers, it may be that a shadow or similar type system is provided for those provisional permits where the districts, if they're going to hire someone under those conditions, then they have to provide support for them. And then I understand it's a new system, but right now it's a hit and miss. Some districts have systems in place and some don't. And I don't think that we can have that inconsistency. The stakes are too high. So I would recommend that it be something similar to like an intern support provider, but a provisional permit support provider or something.
As I listen to the conversation, one of the things that strikes me is defining entry into a program. That has been an issue consistently in collecting data, because when are they in the program? Because you should only be reporting on data for candidates in your program. So I feel like I'm hearing you need one more layer of identification before you can even help us figure out how to get that clean data.
Okay, member Chukowski, Erickson, and then Riggs.
Well, the question I was going to ask is just, has anyone interviewed or strategically sampled LEAs to actually kind of probe this question of what, Terry kind of just mentioned, oh, by the way, in affluent communities, kids have highly qualified teachers more often than in communities with lower SES. And to me, that's a fundamental challenge related to all of this right here. So I guess I'm asking, has anyone done a sampling of LEAs and just asked the HR director, tell me about your teachers, who's actually coming in? Because it has occurred to me that what I submit to the accreditation data system might not always jive with what the LEAs are saying. And I hope I'm not opening a can of worms and things by even saying this, because I appreciate, the fact that we're expected to provide accurate information. But I think there's a triangulation kind of function that will be necessary if those data are to be considered valid. If she sends an email to my HR director and turns out that the numbers that she's reporting are different than the ones I'm reporting, then we have an integrity issue with even using those data in the first place, right? So I'm not saying, obviously I know there's not the manpower to double check and backward reverse verify and all that stuff. But I do think in the name of equity, it's worth maybe selecting a few districts throughout the state and just conducting some conversations with HR directors to see if their numbers match. And then maybe just to see, how are HR directors understanding who these people are? I know in my district, I feel really fortunate. Our HR director's over my dead body short-term staffing permit. It's kind of we'll look under rocks. We'll try to find people. I'm not exactly sure how she shakes them out of the hat, but man, they appear. So I don't know, that could inform kind of long-term efforts. I think the residency initiative is partly in response to these crises of finding enough qualified teachers.
The answer is no one has done that.
I don't know how much time that would take.
So it's my understanding that, as you said, Dr. Alvarado, that the CSUs require subject matter prior to being formally entered. So in the private world, a lot of us have gates, and I'm wondering if, oops, is that me? I'm wondering if that might be an additional question that you ask. At what point do students have to meet subject matter? Would that give you more data that you're looking at, plus however many we know are on Stips and Pips while they're in their field work piece?
I'm really glad that you're going to add it to this table, and it's clear that people are lost and they're not getting the support that they need. That's one issue. And the state, policy-wise, really has no idea of what the need is for teachers. And certainly the community doesn't have an idea of what are the qualifications of the teacher who's teaching my child. And so that's the equity issue that you're talking about. And it just has bothered me my whole life as starting as an elementary teacher, that in this profession, you can have the title without having the license. And I don't know, maybe there are other professions that have that, but I can't really think of any. But I do recall that years ago, there was a documentary on new teachers, and it was talking about how horrible this is. This was, you probably remember it because it was related to when we went to BITSA back in the day. and it was in LA. And my recollection of that documentary was that the people that they interviewed for that and showed were not really teachers. They were emergency permit, they were interns, and there were all these issues. And then the teacher preparation community is judged based upon people we haven't even touched. So I don't know who or what could do something about this policy-wise that we can't use the term teacher if they don't hold the license. We don't go to doctors. If we do go to a doctor that isn't fully prepared, there's some other label for that person. Why is it that everybody who has a classroom is called a teacher when they're really not a teacher?
Okay, Member Chikowski.
So just briefly to revisit, and forgive me if I misunderstood, but when you made some of your updates, Cheryl, at the beginning of this meeting, I thought you mentioned something about possibly considering doing away with things like the CSET. I mean, I don't know if I'm painting with really broad brush.
I think you took it too far. Nobody's saying get away with
taking a second look
nobody's
at how
suggesting to eliminate subject matter, but to figure out other options that might be as acceptable or as possible in terms of to demonstrate the meaning of the subject matter.
Because if there were a college degree that did stand in for that, much of this goes away. And many of our second career engineers, the red tape just got sliced for them, and they can now step into classrooms and work with kids in a way that right now is really cumbersome. So, what does it mean to be a teacher? This all gets into a little bit of full philosophical stuff, but maybe less is more. And maybe if those degrees have certain attributes and they're from accredited institutions, there you go.
Member Forbes.
Well, I just thought I would echo the suggestion, I think starting from Member Alvarado and Member Chakowski, that we survey the field, because I just flashed back on an advisory panel that I sit on with a large urban district in which they accounted for all the Stips and all the PIPs that they had and who was supporting them. And they were folded into the district support plan. So they weren't getting the same degree of support that an intern was, perhaps, because it wasn't regulated in the same way. And they just didn't have the funding to support it, but they were getting some. And so I think there might be some places we could learn how this is actually operating and what the potential unintended consequences might be for, teacher preparation in general.
Yes, Member Riggs and then Member Alvarado.
And just to clarify, related to subject matter, and this may not get it as far as you would like it to go, but we do have approved subject matter programs in the state. And so somebody who has an engineering degree can go to one of those places where there is an approved subject matter degree program. And I have a student I'm advising right now who's coming from another country. And so the same thing is true, that she got her preliminary from the state, and they've said, you've got to complete your subject matter. And so now she has to go and just give over her transcript and have it reviewed by an approved subject matter program. So she doesn't have to retake it. She doesn't have to take the CSET. She just has to get the equivalency. So that's in place. We're not turning away engineers from teaching if they have an engineering degree. They just have to have their degree evaluated to make sure it's equivalent to the CSET requirements.
So this particular item is supposed to be about the data system. But I think what's happening is that we're identifying that the whole idea of Stips and PIPs and the things that you're all having to deal with in the field as it relates to the teacher shortage and the use of Stips and PIPs is a much bigger concept. It feels to me like, and Terry, correct me if I'm wrong, it feels to me like what I'm hearing from you is it might be premature to incorporate PIPs and Stips into the data system at this point in time, because I'm not sure what we would do with the data once we have it, because we don't know whether they're in your program, out of your program, being served. And maybe there's a way to get to that, but maybe it's a year too early for that, and maybe we need to have more foundational conversations about what's happening. I don't know. I'm just trying to summarize what I'm hearing from you all.
I think that until this body helps us identify how to define entry in the program, we can't have PIPs and Stips. See,
we know when we know what student teaching is. We've done a good job of that and defining places within student teaching. But because of the subject matter issue and other issues, I think that it has to go back a step and define entry before people can count heads.
Member Alvarado.
So I'll just make one last point on this. It really is an equity issue. We conducted a survey, random sample school districts, and received feedback on the number of PIPs and STIPs, and an HR director for an affluent district that shall remain nameless replied by asking, "What's a PIP?" It's not in their world.
Member Riggs.
I understand the concern about admission that you raise. The concern I have about leaving PIPs and STIPs off of what you've requested is I heard you say that there are some institutions that have whole cohorts that are on those designations. It seems like if it's not in the survey, we don't even think about it. We just plug in people and they end up being plugged in as interns or as student teacher track, and we're plugging them in incorrectly if you don't give us a different option in the survey.
I think
that's where we might be mirroring your comment. So so if they're in your program, you may or may not know if they're. Yeah, I don't know. I think you can have both, but I think you can't have PIPs and STIPs until you know what defines entry. Because if we're defining it in the category of fieldwork, which is what this entire chart's about, and they haven't met subject matter, then so I just think that there just needs to be some thought around what it means to enter into this box that's drawn on page 4, because that's the box of clinical practice.
All right, Ms. Clark, you have given us a nice document. Let's try to get to.
We'll move forward. Yes.
Okay.
Let me clarify one thing. I think we can do with the definition document. I think in the intern row, we can make it clear that it's not just a paid clinical experience by an individual who holds an intern credential from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. So we make it very clear that an intern holds an intern document. And then we may even be able to say something that a person who was on a STIP or PIP probably is up higher somewhere. We'll work on this document a little bit more. I did just hand you a really exciting 6-page document, or six pages of data. And Nicole, Ms. Hill, is going to help me. I am so excited about this front page because we have never had this level of data. This front page actually tells you that we kind of know, at least by self-report data, how many people were in each of these types of programs how many people entered these programs last year. We have never had anything like that at all. The only thing we've had is like Title II data, or we have credential processing data. So Nicole, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you to talk about the first page.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. So again, this is the initial analysis review part. So like as Terry said, we're very excited about this data. It's a high-level overview, but it's also very detail-oriented. So as we move forward with the next ADS year, we do continue to analyze that data and hopefully present our findings to you at future meetings. So if you can direct your attention to page 1. Oh, I'm sorry, and I just want to go over the ADS report questions. So the ADS report questions are broken out into 4 different sections. Section 1 covers admission requirements. That's, for example, questions regarding GPA, basic skills at admission, subject matter, is the institution on a semester or a quarter system. Section 2 covers program criteria. So that's stuff about clinical practice, fieldwork hours. Section 3 covers candidate demographics. So we look at gender and race and ethnicity. And then Section 4 covers program completers. So how many candidates completed the program on time, how many candidates completed the program within 1 year, and how many candidates completed beyond that year. So moving right along, you can look at page 1, table 1, total new enrollment in educator preparation program 17-18. So again, you see this information is broken out by program area, by program name, by segment. and you see that overall we had a total of 44,612 new candidates. Of this, a little over 18,000 represented the preliminary teaching program. And then you can see to the right of that, 42% of candidates fell under the multiple subject teaching credential, 35 fell under the single subject teaching credential, and 22% fell under ed specialist instruction credential. Okay, so that was a big picture. Now we're going to look at only the preliminary teaching programs. So, and again, this is all self-reported information during the 17-18 pilot year. So if you go ahead and flip to page 2, we take a look at the total programs offered by undergraduate and postgraduate route. Okay, so again, we're counting the number of institutions here, not programs. As you can see, the majority of programs fall under the postgraduate level. If you look directly below that, Table 2 shows a breakout of programs by type of clinical practice model by segment. As you can see, the private and independent segment has the most preliminary teaching programs. In addition, the most identified route was student teaching, closely followed by intern. Does anybody have any questions regarding this?
Let's pause on this page just for a minute, because at first I thought something was wonky, so I went back to the original data, and what is here in representing the chart is accurate, because if you go down to Table 2B, I know there's 23 CSU campuses, and I know they all offer a student teaching model, but there's only 17 showing there for multiple subject, because some of them, it appears, identified either co-teaching, residency, or even not applicable when they submitted their data. So we're going to do is we're going to look at the institutions that identified these non-student teaching, reach out to them and help them realize that next year we know all 23 CSUs do a student teaching model. So there should be a student teaching option. So there is some definitional issue, but we have never had a number of how many undergraduate programs. And now we actually do have it. And this is going to grow because there's 41 new undergraduate programs coming along based on the integrated undergraduate grant. So we expect this number will change over time in Table 2A. And we expect Table 2B will be refined. This is first year data, so we have to kind of figure out where the things are a little bit on the unusual side. Yeah, Cheryl, Commission Member Forbes.
I didn't even notice it. I was just going right on. Does it count in any way for dual credential programs? So I'm thinking of education specialist and multiple subject, or
that's a mess. That is a mess. And because Nicole, I know, has talked with some of you during office hours to figure out what do you do with people who are getting 2 credentials at the same time. Right now, we're double counting them.
Member Alvarado.
So in our case, what is traditional student teaching is a co-teaching. 100% of our students do co-teaching.
Which is good. And I think that we just need to make sure we have our definitions solid, and then we'll figure out as we move forward. So that's good to know that about your institution.
Okay, Nicole?
Okay, if nobody has any additional questions, we'll move forward to page number 3. So we'll start looking at candidate demographics by preliminary teaching program. Okay, so this chart shows a distribution of gender by credential type. The number of female candidates for multiple subject and education specialists show 75% or more female candidates than male candidates. For single subject, the percent of male to female candidates was about half more than female. Okay. So one thing to note is that during the 17-18 pilot year, we only had selection options for male, female, and decline estate. Non-binary gender was not an option. However, for next year's rollout, which will be in December, non-binary gender will be an option. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So moving right along, please flip to page 4. We'll take a look at candidate demographics by race and ethnicity by preliminary program. Based on this information, we see there wasn't a significant difference between the multiple subject, single subject, and ed specialist teaching credentials. We also see there is a moderate percent of candidates who do not identify as white. The percent of candidates who declined to state was surprisingly high and may play a factor in why the race and ethnicity selection showed lower numbers. Overall, looking at all of the races, more than half identify as non-white, which means we have a diverse race population. Just to add a caveat, the 17-18 pilot year data did not include a selection for 2 or more races. However, this will be included in the 18-19 and upcoming ADS rollouts. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. So I will direct this part of the presentation back to Terry.
So on page 5 there with the admission requirements, we ask in the system, does your institution have a minimum GPA? And you think they all do. Well, no, they all don't. There are a number of our private institutions that have no minimum GPA. That doesn't mean they don't look at their candidates very carefully, but they have no established minimum. And you'll notice that where there are 54 private independent institutions that offer these preliminary teacher programs, only 41 of them have a minimum GPA that is stated. And we know there are some very high quality programs that don't have a minimum GPA. In the third row over of data, the 2.72, 2.93, 2.90, that is the mean minimum GPA for the institutions that have a minimum GPA. And then the very last column is the actual cohort mean GPA of last year's incoming cohort as reported by the institutions. Again, it's our first year getting this type of data in this way. We actually did get it by individual program, but we did not report it that way here because it would just been much too complicated. In Table 5B, it has to do with, does the candidate have to satisfy basic skills at admission? And we had a lot of people saying, yes, we know the CSUs have a requirement for that. It looks like the UCs have a parallel requirement. In the private and independent, we know there are 54 institutions that sponsor initial teacher prep. Clearly, there are some that do not require basic skills for admission. In the LEA world, they all do. I think they all do. That's the total number for LEAs. And then 5C at the very bottom is the one about subject matter. And here we did this again by individual program. There's a note here. Although the table shows that almost all the institutions do report they require candidates to satisfy subject matter, a number of institutions who have private school cohorts and have online programs, subject matter is not required at admission. It's not 100% in that situation. So we still need to do some analysis. This document is pretty much hot off the presses. It was still being finalized this morning so we could get it to you because the system closed less than a month ago when we had all the data. And it's a really big pile of data now. But this is the initial what we can share with you today. Any questions on this admission requirements page? Oh.
So it'd be helpful to know what is the end. We know that to know the end, so then we know what the percent is.
And that will be there as soon as we have a little time to modify and update the document.
Yes, absolutely. So looking at the last chart on page 6, we look at the average required hours of clinical practice for preliminary programs by segment. In the ADS, we asked programs to identify the total number of clinical practice hours required. The required minimum number of CP hours for multiple subject, single subject, and ed specialists is 600. This is a minimum, and programs may exceed this as long as the standards are met. As you can see, for the multiple subject program, most segments exceeded the minimum requirement. We are working diligently with individual institutions to identify any gaps or incorrect information. So far, approximately 7 institutions reported to inadvertently misidentifying the number of clinical practice hours in the 17-18 pilot year data. For the 18-19 year, we will continue to hold office hours on a weekly basis and also speak to people at conferences and meetings face-to-face. Last year, office hours were a huge success and positively contributed to institutions' completion of the ADS submission process. That concludes this portion of our initial analysis. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, Member Riggs.
Just on that last question, the 600 required clinical practice hours, do you think that some folks misread that and only put student teaching in?
No, I have. First off, ed specialists don't have a minimum of 600 hours at this point in time because they were not required. Even though the majority of our programs transitioned to the new standards for the 17-18 year, a number did not. There were a number of institutions, for example, at large CSU in an urban setting that was also transferring to the semester system. They had accepted all their candidates before September 1st of 2017, so they were still operating under the prior year's standards. So that is where I think we see some of this variability in the data. Not everybody was fully in the new system last year. This year, everybody's in the new system, and I firmly expect to see the mean to be 600 or higher, because this is the largest category. This is full, all the clinical practice hours. So I don't think they understood this to be student teaching. I think it was just, and also in area, one or two fairly large institutions, they entered 0 across the board for these. And so we've been reaching back out to get the actual accurate information, because when a large institution enters a 0, it pulls down the mean pretty quick.
Yes, Member Riggs.
Is there a reason why you didn't ask if they require subject matter prior to admission to student teaching? Or,
because that's required. And so anyone who said no, no one will say no, even if they don't, because they'd be breaking a precondition. So that's why we asked the one thing, do you require subject matter at admission? And then there's no other real place to ask them conveniently, because it's by law and by precondition, they must have it before student teaching.
Yes, Member Riggs. And then
I just think it'd be interesting if they really would all respond affirmatively, because the person who is filling out this survey, it could just be interesting to find out if all of the institutions understand that they're supposed to be doing that.
Member Erickson and then Member Chukowski.
We ask who's filled out the survey, right? The dean has to.
Yeah.
But
the dean is required to review this before it is submitted. So it's submitted under the dean's signature.
Member Chukowski.
So if someone's working as an intern, does the program report their contracted teaching time as clinical practice?
That used to be how we thought of interns, but under the new program standards, the 600 hours when you're talking with an intern is the time you are working with an experienced educator. It's not time you're alone one-on-one teaching your students, because you're not getting the feedback from an experienced educator. So the 600 hours that an intern has to meet involves when they're working with their master mentor teacher at their site, when they're working with their university supervisor who's come to observe them, when they're working with their grade level planning team or their content area planning team. So it is not, and that's something we're still educating intern programs about, because there are some that do multiply, 6 hours a day times 5 days a week times 36 weeks of the year, and they get a number, and we are trying to clarify that and clean that data mishap up.
We spent a lot of time with our commissioners to clarify what their intent was, and there is a fieldwork guidance document that we put together that talks specifically about that question. Can you count everything under an internship? And the answer is no, and we try to define when you can and when you can't. And clearly we have additional work to do, but because it's not super clear.
And maybe just a follow-on question, I find the completer surveys quite interesting and useful on the induction end of things, as people apply for their clear credential. So I'm wondering if there's any similar survey. And I wonder, as people apply for preliminary credentials, yes? And I'm wondering if the information interns provide is separated out from that which all the other applicants provide, because I will say that hats off to our special ed interns who are hired at 1.0, who have to fly while they're building the plane, while they're taking coursework, they're like the most highly in-demand people who apparently are on the hook for something like 130 hours of support beyond their classroom assignments. I mean, there are not enough hours in the day, to actually deliver the support that's going to ensure the retention of these teachers. So I know I sound like I'm a little bit on my soapbox here, but at some point we have to ensure that there's, first of all, the potential to implement the expectation of the support. And then secondly, how might feedback from these interns applying for their preliminary credentials help us identify where they're getting the support they need and where it's just on paper on an MOU in someone's filing cabinet? Because it's just, we can't chew people up and spit them out, especially if we want a diverse special ed teaching force.
Okay.
I feel like we could just clarify one thing on page 1. It was stated that there's 44,612 new teachers, when I just want to reiterate that some of these are double counted, and I sometimes documents become public, and I just wanted to reiterate that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. This is, did you have a comment?
No question, just a comment. This information is extremely useful. I'm very impressive, and thank you so much for compiling this. This is awesome.
There's a lot more data that's not here that we still need to go through, but we didn't feel comfortable putting it out in public yet until we realized, oh, look what this can't be a right number kind of thing. So we're still digesting it all, and more will be coming to you as we expand this and look at it and clean it up. And
yeah, I hear the wheels going and everybody's head going, All right, well, we're look forward to your next report. Thank you, Nicole. And this is just an information item, and great work. Thanks so much. All right, I think we'll go to item 12, and then we'll take our afternoon quick break. So item 12 is, let's see. Do we have a 2 o'clock? Oops. Sorry. What item is that, Ms.? 18, thank you. All right. Yes, got it. Okay. Item 18 is the report on actions taken to address stipulations at Holy Names University. Consultant Erin Sullivan will present this item. Joining her by video, do we have the video? Okay. Our institutional representatives, Dr. Kimberly Mayfield, Dean, School of Education, and Dr. Timothy Weeks. Hello. Assessment Coordinator, School of Education. Does anyone need to recuse themselves? Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Are we're going for a walk? Take a walk on the wild side? All right.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay. Ms. Sullivan, would you begin, please?
Yes, thank you.
I didn't get to double check. Did anybody need to recuse themselves? No? Okay, thank you.
So, good afternoon. This agenda item presents you with an update on the activities of Holy Names University to address the remaining stipulation from its site visit findings and a recommendation related to its accreditation status. Following its April 2016 site visit, the accreditation team recommended accreditation with major stipulations and 7 stipulations, including a revisit. The COA directed that the institution submit quarterly reports demonstrating its activities and efforts to meet all standards less than fully met. And the institution submitted all quarterly reports in a timely manner, and those were subsequently presented to you at your November 2016 and your February 2017 meetings. And then 2 BIR team members and myself conducted a focused revisit in April of 2017. The report of those findings were presented to you at your June 2017 meeting. And at that time, the COA voted to approve an accreditation status of accreditation with stipulations. The remaining stipulation was related to the unit and program assessment and evaluation system at Holy Names. The finding of the revisit team related to that unit program assessment and evaluation system was that a system had been developed, but full implementation of all the components was still in progress, and that there was still no evidence of data analysis at the unit level for program improvement purposes. Holy Names has now had the opportunity to fully implement its system and put a process in place for unit level analysis. The appendix of your item includes the most recent report submission from Holy Names, and staff is recommending that the accreditation status for Holy Names University be changed from accreditation with stipulations to accreditation. As was mentioned, Dr. Kimberly Mayfield, Dean of the School of Education at Holy Names, is on Zoom, as is Dr. Timothy Weeks, who is, I'm going to say, the newly hired assessment coordinator, though he has been with Holy Names now for about a year, but he was not part of their faculty when we were there in April 2017.
Terrific. Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. I'd like to provide the institution with an opportunity to share with us some of your comments about the report or anything that you'd like to add.
After you.
Well, we have been able to benefit greatly from a closer look at our accreditation processes, and especially with relation to assessment. We've found it very valuable to talk to our faculty at the unit level as well as constituents about specific areas of that have been illuminated through our surveys and information we've gotten from our students as well as master teachers and university supervisors. So we are very much in the process of the continuous evaluation process and have used some of those strategies for other programs that we have in the School of Education that don't lead to credentialing, but other types of certifications. We have a master's degree program. So I think we have learned a lot, and we are really happy that our institution has been able to support us with what we've needed to be successful in the process.
All right, thank you so much. I'd like to open the floor to the Committee on Accreditation to ask the institution any clarifying questions or make comments about the report. I'll remind you this is an action item. Member Riggs.
I congratulate you on doing so much work on assessment, and it was wonderful to read. The only question I have relates to the surveys, and you talked about having difficulty getting a good response rate, and so it looks like you moved the response time to be built into coursework before the semester's ended. And I wondered if you had any concerns about how valid the feedback would be if students are giving you feedback before they've received their grades and courses, if you think that could have some influence on how they would respond.
We don't think that it will influence how they respond. We did want to build in an opportunity in a way where students were already convened. With any of our school-based surveys, faculty leave the room, and so there is an opportunity for there to not be any, feelings of pressure or coercion. And the surveys ask the candidates to report on their experiences in the field, so the class instructors are not the people who evaluate them. So we feel like we've minimized sort of any opportunity for the candidates to feel like there's any pressure, or I think you understand, but the people that they are evaluating are not in the classroom with them. So
And also, it makes it much more closely aligned with the university practice of having the faculty course evaluations given before the end of the semester and before the students get their actual grades. So we're kind of aligning our process with the university's course evaluation process.
Thank you.
Can't hear. Okay.
Right. This. Does anybody want to do a motion? I have a motion from Member Alvarado to accept the report, a second by Member Riggs. All those in favor say hi. Say hi. Say aye or hi. Those opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hang on just one second.
You're accepting the report, but are you taking any action regarding the stipulation?
The report.
I did not hear that.
Suggests that we're accepting the recommendation that's stated in the report.
Thank you.
To remove the stipulation.
Just wanted it clear.
Okay. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Still, congratulations.
Thank you,
Yay.
Dr. Mayfield and Dr. Weeks.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Item 12 is the discussion of guidance document on granting equivalency. Director Terry Clark will present this information item. Ms. Clark, will you begin, please?
Yes. So as we wrote up in the item for you, way back in 2008, so 10 years ago, the legislature said, you need to get some guidance out there to institutions on equivalency, because what had been happening in the special ed world is someone would earn a mild moderate credential. Then they'd want to go back and get a moderate severe credential. And the IHE in some cases were saying, you need to start and do an entire program. And the candidate was not very happy, needless to say. Now, IHEs do have restrictions on how many units you can bring in from a different institution or things like that as part of their regional accreditation. But we did develop a document, and we shared it with the special ed programs. So back in 2010, it was suggested that this document could be really helpful if it was generalized to any type of educator preparation. Well, we did develop it back in 2010, but it never really got distributed. It kind of got put away for a while. And starting a year ago at the CCAC conference, the 800 of your closest credential analyst friends, when you get to talk to them all over a couple days, they wanted a presentation on this idea of how should an institution determine if equivalency has been met, and should it grant an equivalence or not. And so Cheryl and I have gotten to do this presentation, and we always say that every commission-approved program has the right and the responsibility to determine equivalency where appropriate and to grant it. But the institution has a lot of leeway there. So what we've given you here is the 2010 generalized document updated for 2018. And we were hoping if you had any advice or guidance or any parts of the document that you did not feel were as clear as they need be, if you would identify those for us, and then we would work to modify it, and then we would actually get the document posted. Because when we've talked with the credential counselors on this, they've said, this document could be so helpful, and I need to take it back to my program coordinator, because a credential analyst does this hand in hand with a program coordinator. And so now credential analysts have heard about this last year and this year. We need to get this out for the program coordinators. So this is the document, and we're ready to take any guidance or advice from you that you can give us. Because I know you've read it, because you guys always do your homework. So I'm pretty comfortable with that fact. So what do you think? Is it unclear in any areas?
Looking around. Member Erickson?
I liked having the scenarios to read through. That was helpful, and I think will provide clear guidance to our program faculty.
If anybody has any additional scenarios that come up at your institution, send them to Cheryl or me, and that allows us to amend the document and add other useful scenarios. We did have to pull out some scenarios because originally back in 2010, there were some scenarios about they did 1 year in a BITSA program, and then they wanted to go to university to finish in a CLEAR program. Well, BITSA programs don't exist, university CLEAR programs don't exist, so scenarios had to come out. So if there's anything you have as a scenario, we'd love to have the topic so we could think about it and write it up.
I was trying to find it. Is there a comment there about fees for doing this service? It seems like I read that in there somewhere and I'm not finding it now.
There is this place in here where and more than once, I believe we say an institution may charge a fee for this. We don't set the fee. We don't prohibit a fee. Let me figure out where this might be. I'm not seeing it either. You're right. That is something we can definitely add. That should be one of the basics. It was in our presentation, most certainly at CCAC. It's in our PowerPoint, but the word fee is actually not in this document. I did a control find. But we will add that.
Okay. Member Forbes?
So what would be the process for monitoring this? Is this part of the accreditation monitoring?
It is part of accreditation, and the guidance we gave to the credential counselors when we talked with them is, of course, you document. And we talked about kind of a teeter-totter, a seesaw. You do not want to be really, really super loose and say, oh, everything's good. And you also don't want to be super, super tight. We'll end up with the legislature trying to legislate this again. You want to be at the middle of the teeter-totter and balance, but you do need to document. During an accreditation visit, the team may ask things such as, so, how many equivalencies in an area have you granted? And as long as you have supporting documentation that shows how you made your decision, no problem. We did tell the story, and the reason the subject matter at the very end of the scenarios is very explicit and precise is because there was a very entrepreneurial institution of higher education that is no longer working. And they took money and they wrote subject matter verification letters when the people had not done the coursework. And that's why in the subject matter field, a third party, so the candidate did not go there for their bachelor's degree and the candidate is not going there for their credential. That's a third party institution. They are only allowed to do a subject matter evaluation if the degree is in the same field as the credential now, because they were verifying subject matter that had nothing to do with the subject that person was going to teach. And so that was all put through the regulatory process.
Well, I guess just to follow up, because I don't remember this ever coming up on any site visits that I was part of or, in our own site visits. So is it now a question that will regularly be asked? Is it something that we as a body will be giving?
It's something we need to add into the process. And I think it's something Cheryl and I need to do a little more talking about to figure out where is the appropriate time. Maybe it has to do with the common standards and maybe there's something we'll add to that process. But it has not been fully implemented, but it is going there.
Okay, Member Riggs. Thank you.
I'm curious about the fact that it came up at all. With the subject matter authorizations, there was a huge resistance at one point of doing them. And I feel like the institution, what would happen with subject matter on some campuses is the department chair or the program coordinator would receive and go through this major process to decide equivalency. And so here we are talking about doing it with other credential programs. And so I feel like somebody does need to be able to do this for people who want to be teachers. But what's the obligation of an institution? And I think that's maybe what Cheryl was getting at related to how can this be part of the accreditation process? Because I can see people just saying, well, we're not going to do that. We offer a program, but we're not going to do the equivalency review because even if they pay a fee, people just don't want to do that. It's tedious, it's time consuming, and I don't know how you get people to do it.
And I don't think we have the authority to force an institution to do it. I think it's a local decision, and I don't know. Yeah.
Sure. Member Erickson.
Are you thinking you may keep a list of institutions that are offering to do that?
Well, we do have a list in the special ed world because out-of-state prepared special education teachers and out-of-country prepared special education teachers, there's actually no way for some of them to get a credential unless they have such an evaluation done. And they're actually working on a coded. It's now going through the review process because those special ed teachers are sometimes really held up. I think that it makes a lot of sense here, probably related to common standard and that standard about having a process to recommend people for the credentials. So we could add in one more little thing that talks about in the past 3 years, how many candidates have you granted an equivalency for or something like that, just so it's known. And then we have the ability. We're looking at the same thing for intern early completion options, because right now there's no separate information kept on that. And so if we actually knew how many intern early completion people there were, then we could actually talk with the institution about how that worked or didn't work. So these are things we're having to figure out still, I think.
And I don't think it makes sense for us to keep a list because there's maintenance involved in that list. And the minute we do it, it's out of date. So it seems to me to make more sense the way Terry's describing it as in terms of to ask the question, to get the data, to figure out what an institution's doing.
Yeah, because I think that we'd want to track that somehow so we don't get into a situation like Terry was just describing.
Member Chukowski, did you?
Yeah, I rely on the support of my district's credential analysts often to answer these questions because I'm kind of new to this whole, like all the fine points of this. But just so I understand, if someone comes to my district from out of state, special educator, there have been a number who've been participating who've been supported by mentors in our induction program. And then we discover, like into the year, that there's a need to evidence what they did out of state. And it has to be evaluated by somebody. Did I understand right that they need to persuade an institution, like a third party, to do that evaluation? As a district, we have no authority to acknowledge that preliminary credential requirement because we're not authorized by CPC, right?
The only LEAs that have that authority are the LEAs that offer preliminary ed specialist programs. Okay. And that has to do with the fact where the candidate has completed what we consider a generic special ed program. It doesn't align to our mild moderate or our moderate severe or our early childhood or our DHH or our VI. It's just special ed writ large. And there are some states that have this. They have one special ed credential and it authorizes you to do whatever with any student on an IEP. And in California, that we don't give them a full special ed credential until their transcript has been evaluated. And so they do have to go to a preliminary program for that to get that evaluation. So we do have a list of those preliminary entities that are willing to do that. It's a fairly short list right now. But anyone prepared out of state with a generic program for special ed or anyone prepared in another country for special ed has to have that done or they can do nothing in California. It's a real door for them.
So I think there's obviously many situations, as there is with every single thing that we do, different scenarios. But I think the vast majority of what we're talking about are candidates that are coming into your program. We're not. There is the third party thing, but that's over here. I think the vast majority of who needs this guidance is we have a candidate who's come to us with some pre-existing, condition, I guess, in a positive way. So, and what do I do with that? Can I give them credit for that? That's where we get 99% of our questions, or at least 90% of our questions. And so I think that's where most of this conversation should be occurring. I think that there are some extra complicated situations as well with third parties and that kind of thing. But I don't think those should drive all of the conversation.
I just wanted to thank you for doing this. Being on the other side where I've been, people have requested, can you look at this and do equivalencies? And I'm digging, like, how can I decide that? Exactly. I don't really know that I can or wave my magic wand. And so thank you for doing this.
I did find something on the cost issue. It's on page 2, right above the header of methods for determining equivalency, we phrased it as program sponsors may use their established institutional processes to recover appropriate costs to conduct evaluations. Maybe we need to be a little more overt there. That's a little convoluted. But yes, institutions may charge fees to do this.
Okay, Member Riggs?
So just accreditation wise, when I think about what's happening here is an institution that has an approved program can say that something else is equivalent, and that does appear to need to be under accreditation in a major way. And so aside from numbers so if an institution reports the numbers, what I heard you say earlier, Terry, was that they would have to have their numbers and they would have to have their process. For equivalency. Mm-hmm. And that would be reviewed. And so that's a new thing that's not in accreditation presently in this way.
Well, I think you could read into the common standards part where we talk about the credential recommendation process. I think we can make sure that our teams are looking for that in addition, because that is part of the credential process. How do you know the person has actually completed all of the requirements? So we could do a better job of expanding it so that it includes this.
Just another aside that does kind of relate is the subject matter approval process is the same thing, and it has always seemed to me that once a subject matter program is approved, it's kind of forever approved, and there's no real monitoring of the waivers and all of that. So it's just something to put on the list of things that need to be tightened up a bit, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a biggie, and one that we've talked about for many years. And there are many issues of resources and staffing and involved in that. So it's on our to-do list to figure out what to do with, but I don't know the answer to that one right now. Terry, you would know.
And right now, anytime we have any conversation about trying to ensure quality, the minute you've mentioned that, employers go to, there's a shortage, don't shut any of the doorways. So we have to figure, yes, but I think you've raised a very good point.
All right. There's no action needed on this item, so we can move on and say thank you. And unless there are any suggestions beyond. No? Okay. All right. Thanks, Son. Let's move on to item 16, which is the report of the discussion of the 2017-18 annual report of the COA to the Commission. Administrator Cheryl Hickey will introduce this action item. Does anyone need to recuse themselves? I'm not sure that belongs here. Please. That's funny. And I'm can I blindly read forward? I don't know. Ms. Hickey, will you begin, please?
Sure. Well, this is a draft of the annual report from all of you to the Commission. It will be presented. Typically, it's presented at the December meeting, which is now the end of November meeting of the Commission, by the two co-chairs. Bob Frelly, co-chair Frelly, is going to be on the East Coast, unfortunately, on that day. Yes, and so Dr. Cheryl Forbes has agreed to step in, representing the IHE folks on the table. And so we're grateful. Thank you. And Dr. Moore, obviously representing the K-12 part of the committee here. This is a draft. I would like to just take suggestions, make some edits, clean it up, and have you approve the document to go forward to finalize for the Commission's agenda item, which I believe it has to be posted by next week.
From Friday.
From Friday.
We're posting this week from Friday.
From Friday. So I do know that since I've done this, one of the things that I would like to add, just to let you know, is under the technical assistance section, and we can go chapter by chapter if you want, but I would like to add some additional work we've done in the area of induction, and maybe if there are other things that staff has. I just didn't have time to get a really comprehensive list of technical assistance that we did last year. So there may be a few things I've left off there that I'd like to add. I do want to acknowledge this year I had tremendous help from Michelle Bernardo. Michelle back there, who really put together all of Chapter 2. She was fantastic going through our site visit reports and, all sorts of things and getting that chapter together, Section 2. So thank you, Michelle. So we can go chapter by chapter if you want to, if there are any edits. If there's small edits, you can certainly send them to me. I'm fine with that. If you want to do them and send them to me afterwards, that'd be great. But any suggestions, I'm happy to take. So if you want to go chapter by chapter, that'd be great.
All right.
And the letter at the beginning.
Let's start with the letter. Any suggestions for changes on the letter? Chapter 1 then? Anything for Ms. Hickey in Chapter 1?
Uh-huh.
I don't know if this is accurate. Looking at the Committee on Accreditation 217-18, was PIA, when did PIA's term end? No, she's listed there, but I wasn't.
Oh, she listed there. I'll double check on that. I don't remember right off the top of my head. That's a good question.
Okay.
Was that last year?
I thought it was 2000. She thought it ended in 2017.
We did.
Right.
You really? Oh, okay.
Right.
All right. Then that's an extra. Then okay.
Right.
Good catch. Thank you.
But that explains it. 'Cause,
Yeah.
I'll say it's not on the list.
1, 2, 3, and I do have both Yvonne and James because James took over or finished out Yvonne's term. So 1, 2, 3.
Right. And then, remember, Alvarado will need to be listed on there.
Yeah, Alvarado. I need to list you. Why aren't you on here? That's why. Because Pia was supposed to be you. Got it.
Exactly.
Sorry about that.
All right.
Did not mean that.
Anything else in Chapter 1? Do we want to move to Chapter 2? How many chapters are there? Yeah.
3.
Yeah. Anything in Chapter 3 then?
3 sections. In Section 3. So Section 3 is our work plan for this year, which.
And I just had a couple of typos, but I'll
Okay.
send those to you.
Sure. Okay.
Other than that, it was amazing. It was a lot of work. Makes me tired. And I love reading this report because it reviews all the things that we did, and it's like, wow.
Yeah.
That's so super impressive. Member Erickson?
I would just like to commend staff for all of the work that's been done and for leading us through all of this work in the past year. It's amazing reading this report of all that has happened, not just this year, but in the 2 or 3 years, has it been 2 years preceding this, how much we've accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Great.
Member Morrison?
I'd just like to echo that. I know as a member of the committee, I'm part of the body that's producing this, but this was a great education for me reading this. Thank you, and it's going to be a great reference. I mean, I come here every couple of months and I get the information, but it often feels fragmented and atomized, and
right.
I get confused which colour we're in at the moment and things like that.
Set away.
And so having all this as not only a review but a reference going forward, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, and then obviously for those of us who are new, it's like, all right, you better do your homework and pay attention because these people aren't messing around.
All right. Well, this is an action item, so I would need a motion to accept the annual report as it is with minor edits. And a motion by Erickson, second by Forbes. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations.
Thank you. Awesome. All right, last item. I think it's the last item. Second to the last item, yes.
We are on item 20 then.
20.
Which is the discussion of institutions with stipulations and inactive status. Ms. Hickey, will you begin, please? This is an information item.
Sure. This is a conundrum I was hoping that the commission or the COA could help us try to think through. So at times when institutions have a program where they've had a number of difficulties, one of the things they like to do is to go inactive. You know, if they have less than 15 candidates, which is what we don't allow anything over 15 because that's now you're running pretty much a full program. But if you have less than 15, they can go inactive, regroup, rethink, take some time off, try to figure it out, and then reactivate. That has worked really, really well, and the whole idea of the inactive programs has worked really well for us for a number of years. Where we get into trouble is where the institution has stipulations, and the idea that they're supposed to address stipulations within 1 year. They can be inactive for up to 5 years. Those things are in conflict with one another, and it causes us a little bit of problems with the commission when the commission wants to know why we haven't removed stipulations on an institution. And I always have to say, well, there are no candidates in the program. They're inactive and that kind of thing. And that may be all we can do, but we wanted to present this because it's now happened a second time. And I don't know why, I can't remember which institution. But I wanted to try to resolve this from a more procedural place than anything else in terms of rethinking. We came up with 3 possible options for you to think about. And I don't know if Catherine or Terry wants to jump in and add anything more, but we just wanted a chance to talk it through with you all and try to figure out what we do. So
I would like to just add that, and I know you noted that in here, that there are times when a program that does have stipulations wants to go on inactive so they can really address it in a deep, deep way. Yeah. That means stopping to enroll students and working on it. So I think that in the item we spelled out that it's not trying to dodge anything necessarily, that there can be a very legitimate reason for being on an inactive.
Right.
So, yep.
That's it.
Questions, comments, thoughts? I actually had one question. We've got the 3 possible options to consider. I did have one question above about the institution on page 1, not to exceed a maximum of 1 year after the anticipated inactive date. If I was wondering if they still aren't done, are they, or what do they do if they're unable to complete it in a year?
So this is the current. So I forgot. I did list. This is the current handbook language, and there are, since we've been doing inactives now for a number of years, and it's much. We have our processes in place much clearer. There are a couple of things that we probably should address, and I mentioned those on page 2, 1 and 2. So we really don't need a plan for candidates to complete the program. Typically, they do that on their own. We'll ask them when they submit the document saying we want to go inactive, we ask when is the last day you expect your last candidate to complete. And that's always within the year, or we pretty much don't allow it. So we can probably get rid of that. We don't need an additional plan. And then the second thing was it says that they may not recommend any candidates. I think, hold on one second, give me a moment. We wanted to change that to, as long as they're inactive, they can recommend those remaining candidates. So that part is a little it's not consistent with what we're practicing now. Once you withdraw the program, there's no recommending candidates. But again, it's only limited to those 15 candidates or less that are in the program. So it's a way of teaching out. I don't know if I got to your question, but it reminded me of that I didn't mention those. So your question again was, sorry.
What if someone doesn't finish?
Okay.
What if they're not taught out?
Right. Right.
What's the obligation of the institution with regards to teaching them out or providing resource for them to complete their? Thank you, to complete their degree.
Well, the institution gets 5 years. Putting aside stipulations, they get 5 years to be on inactive status. Until that last candidate is done, I won't allow the withdrawal to come forward to you. Now, they may be a candidate from many years ago what we always say is make sure you notify anybody that you know that's still out there that may be coming back to finish the program. And that's usually done pretty well. But for the most part, we're really in touch with them candidate by candidate to make sure that they have finished everybody. So, and if it turns out that somebody comes back from years ago, which happens occasionally, and they legitimately finish the program during the time in which they were approved, we can handle that on a paper app, which our credential office does. But essentially, we're making sure that all 15 or less of those candidates are done. So.
Okay. All right. So looking at the three options to consider, I don't know. I like number 3.
Okay.
Myself. I thought that was really seemed fair.
Okay.
So, yeah. Member Briggs?
It seems like that's the only one that addresses what Catherine told us. So I would be in support of it unless I hear something else.
We don't need to vote on this. It was really so we can give them guidance to your next steps.
Right.
With regards to this, it says you'll bring something back to us in February.
Yep. Great.
Get any feedback, Member Alvarado?
So, I mean, given that there are 3 choices, it seems like option 1 is a little too stringent, too strict.
Yes.
But what are the limitations to option 2? I guess is the question. What would you see as unintended consequences or possible harm to candidates, let's say?
I think the issue is that we give 5 years to be on inactive. So when we set a different time frame, that puts things in conflict. Having said that, we can make it work as you see fit.
Yeah.
I guess I would add to that. I think we have a couple situations right now where a program is taking either 2 or 3 years to redesign itself.
Right.
And so there's a poor site visit, the program isn't doing well, and they decide they really want to redesign, and they're planning a 3-year redesign time frame. So by requiring them to address it in only 1 year, we are really impacting their ability as an institution to say, this is how we want to marshal our resources, and this is the time frame that we want to consider in our redesign.
And the alternative is if we made them withdraw the program and then resubmit, we're actually causing more workload for everybody unnecessarily. And so that's why we're trying to find the right sweet spot for this.
I actually think recommendation 3 might even give room in consultation, not official action, in working with programs who are struggling and do need more time.
Right.
To be able to say, have you considered this? Right now, we don't have those conversations because we're at cross purposes right now. So I'm not saying it would happen that often, but I think that there are times when that would have been a nice option, especially sometimes you all have had many times where an institution just keeps coming back on the same program. Had they been able to not withdraw but step out for a little while, that might have been a useful tool.
Right, right. I think Katrina had it.
So just to make sure I understand, it sounds like inactive means you don't offer services to incoming eligible teachers.
Right. You're not enrolling new candidates. You're teaching out the rest of the candidates that you have.
So the expectation is that if your program is inactive, you are in fact continuing to serve currently enrolled candidates in your program until
they're done. Yes, up to 5 years. Yeah.
Right. If there's
less than 15 candidates,
and
15 or less,
more than 15, you're not allowed to go inactive.
Right.
Okay. So hypothetically, in a totally hypothetical situation, let's say a program lost funding, for example, or it was decided through some strange manner that there would not be resources devoted to a program, and it happened from 1 year to the next. That program would need to remain active, or
so that program would either need to remain active. I don't know how they do that without resources. They need to find alternatives for those candidates. So they need to teach out those candidates, or they need to say, we're working with this partner over here and they're going to finish you off on the program. There's a variety of ways. It all depends on the factors involved.
Okay.
But inactive is sort of our step before withdrawal that sort of allows an institution, for a number of reasons, either low enrollment, they're just not sure where they want to go, but they're not ready to withdraw it yet. They want to press pause because they want to rethink something. So and it's been really beneficial for the field. And it also helps us understand, they're not really taking new candidates, but they're not gone. So it's been a really good category. But where we've had this problem is when stipulations have to be addressed within a year, according to our procedures, and yet the very program that has a problem is in that limbo land, and we can't resolve it till there's new candidates in, because there's all sorts of
any
things.
number of ways
Yeah.
that could come to be. So I mean,
Exactly.
in light of all that, I think the third option
Yeah.
makes
Okay.
sense to me.
Third option.
My recollection is there was an institution this year that had candidates in it. They were going inactive, and they had some stipulations that were egregious.
Yeah.
Like, we did not want these candidates in their program, but they were refusing to address the stipulations because they were going inactive.
Right.
And our hands were tied. It's like, okay, I guess we have to let it go, even though, yeah.
So just to address your scenario, we actually have had institutions who've lost funding.
Right.
We had an IHE who lost funding, and we worked with them to teach out. But they withdrew because they didn't have funding. So they were closing down their program. So they took no new candidates, and staff worked very closely with them, where they had to have a plan by name of each student about where those students were going to be served, how they were going to finish, and the amount of time left, and all of those things. There's an option not an option for this discussion, but just so that you understand, there are also institutions who know that they're going to wind down their program. Maybe they have 50 candidates. They're not at the 15 to go inactive. So they're still under our accreditation, full accreditation. They're paying annual accreditation fees. They're participating fully in all the activities. As an institution, they could still decide not to take any new candidates.
Yeah.
With them knowing they're going to go inactive, they may even disclose this to us, but they don't become officially inactive until they've got their numbers down.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good. This whole thing is reminding me of something I wanted to say during my staff reports, which I'll say at the end. How about we talk about that at the end of this? Because I just totally forgot something large I wanted to mention to you all.
I think we're at the end of this.
So is three?
Yeah. 3 is, yeah. Okay, Ms. Clark.
And the interesting thing is, independently, both Catherine and I thought of this number 3 idea, and then after the item was posted, I came up with what about this? So I'm going to ask it today so we can all think about it. I think number 3 works really well when the stipulation is focused on a program and that program has gone inactive. It also is fine when you have a small institution where maybe their only program, or they have 2 programs. They have a teacher induction and an admin induction, and one is inactive. But if you have a large institution that runs 20 programs, there's a stipulation on a common standard, such as maybe the field experience is not as well infrastructured as it should be. And one of the most egregious programs is the program that is going inactive. It may be challenging for the institution to report to you and show that they've really fixed the issue when the stipulation is on a common standard issue if the program that was most remiss isn't involved. So I just think we need to think about this a little more. It came to me late, Cheryl, after we'd already posted.
Great. I'd rather you think about it now.
So we craft language, Terry, that that includes this kind of acknowledgement to the institution that they would have to address that somehow if it's a common standards issue. I mean, we could bring back some kind of.
I think we can think about this. It also puts in my mind that when we have item 6 and we identify programs that are requesting to go inactive, we need to actually put a statement if there are any stipulations on that institution. just so that it would be official and it would be known. And then at that point in time, you'd be able to say, oh, okay, so this program's going inactive, but this was an issue. We need to maybe send additional information to that institution. So we come up with these ideas and we think about them a lot more, and sometimes we come up with more thoughts, and makes it more complicated.
Okay, great.
Yes, with good results. We appreciate the extra thought. All right, thank you. No action is necessary at this time, and we can move on to public.
Let me, if I can go back to staff reports for one, just for 1 minute, I promise.
Yes, sure.
So I meant to mention this to you. So one of our institutions, Phillips Graduate Institutes, Phillips Graduate Institute, they have only PPS programs. They lost their WASC accreditation. They appealed the WASC accreditation finding. WASC and the institution reached an agreement. They will be withdrawing their WASC accreditation. So we are currently in the process of working with them to move their candidates to either have them complete their candidates or move them to another program. We work with them really closely every time an institution closes like this. They will continue to operate until April of 19, after which time they will no longer be a program sponsor. So I just wanted to give you guys the update on that. And Catherine's been talking. I went to Paris, and then Catherine took over and was talking directly with them. So,
do you want me to mention their? So it's been a little tangled because they have been persistent in trying to find a workaround that we have advised them is not appropriate. So they have someone from another state who is willing. Purchase is not the right word, but I don't know what other word to use. So I'm really aware this is in the public record, and that's not the right word. They use the word merge, but that's also not the right word. But kind of take them on, and the comment is that we should still be able to operate our programs because now we have someone with regional accreditation. And we have walked them through the need for that new institution to go through initial institutional approval, and then for that new institution to then get those programs approved. And I'm not quite sure that I know they understand it. I think they're still looking and including, but we're going to keep our same name. So staff is being very diligent in holding to the responsibilities that any other institution, whether they have the same name or not, would be required to adhere to coming into California.
Reasons, from what I can tell, are mostly financial, governance structure and resources. A lot of financial issues from what I can tell. Their programs were deemed to be fairly strong from what I could tell, but it's the institution itself and the structure of the institution that apparently is not as strong as WASC would require.
Okay, thank you so much for that little addendum to our staff report. That's good. All right, public comment. Does any member of the public have anything it wishes to say? They ghosted us. All right. Yeah, we'll do a little debrief. Let's adjourn. Having no further business, I adjourn the November meeting of the Committee on Accreditation. The next meeting of the committee will be on January 31st and February 1st, 2019. Thank you so much. Turn up. Yep.